3 weeks before what was supposed to be my wedding day, I was sitting alone in an empty venue, watching an event coordinator quietly dismantle the sample centerpieces I had approved just days earlier. Candles snuffed out one by one, linen folded with professional detachment. Flowers boxed up like they had never symbolized a future at all. My phone had been vibrating nonstop for hours. Calls, texts, voicemails piling up, but I hadn't answered a single one. And the strangest part was this. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. My breathing was steady. For a woman who had just canceled her wedding, I felt calm, clear. Let me rewind. Earlier that week, my fiancé had looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Cancel your best friend as maid of honor. I want my ex there instead." Not at the wedding. In the wedding. He wanted his ex-girlfriend standing beside me, replacing the woman who had been my constant for nearly 2 decades, the person who had shown up for every ugly chapter of my life without ever needing an explanation. I remember freezing, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth, wondering if I'd misheard him. People don't usually say things like that unless they're convinced you won't walk away. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I just looked at him and said very quietly, "Interesting choice." He smiled. Actually smiled. Like he thought the conversation was over. Like he thought I would bend. By noon the next day, I had canceled everything. The venue, the catering, the photographer, the florist. Tens of thousands of dollars. Gone. Money I had saved for years, erased in a handful of phone calls. And then, maybe out of pettiness, maybe out of absolute clarity, I did one more thing. I sent his ex an invoice. A real one. Itemized. Professional. Every dollar lost because of her sudden role in my wedding. At the bottom, I added a single note. "Thank you for the inspiration." That's when the panic started. Voicemails, tears, bargaining, rage. His mother calling like I'd committed a crime. His ex texting like it was all a misunderstanding. But here's what none of them expected. I wasn't devastated. I was relieved. Because when a man asks you to erase the person who has always protected you, just to make space for someone from his past, that isn't love. That's a test. And failing it saved my life. I met him 3.5 years ago in the most unremarkable way possible, through mutual friends at a birthday dinner I almost skipped because I was tired and had work the next morning. He sat across from me, quiet at first, listening more than he spoke. When he did talk, it was thoughtful, measured. The kind of man who asked questions and actually waited for the answers. I remember noticing his hands, steady, clean nails, no nervous tapping. He felt safe. At that point in my life, safe mattered. We started slow. Coffee dates that turned into long walks. Texts that didn't demand immediate replies. He never rushed me, never pushed. When he asked me to be exclusive, it felt like a choice, not a trap. A few months in, he told me about his past, about his ex. They'd been together for years, college sweethearts, on and off toward the end. We realized we wanted different things, he said, shrugging like it was settled history. But we stayed friendly. That should have registered more than it did. Back then, I believed adults could be friends with their exes without it meaning anything. I believed maturity solved most problems. I believed trust was something you offered until someone gave you a reason not to. And for a long time, he gave me none. We moved in together after a year. Not impulsively, practically, a shared spreadsheet, rent split down the middle, grocery budgets discussed like responsible adults. He cooked, I cleaned, I handled planning, he handled logistics. It worked. When he proposed 8 months ago, it wasn't flashy. No crowd, no cameras, just the two of us in our apartment, rain tapping against the windows. He got down on one knee, hands steady, voice calm. "Marry me," he said. Not a question, a promise. I said yes without hesitation. Wedding planning, surprisingly, went smoothly at first. I handled the emotional pieces, the seating chart negotiations, the family politics, the million tiny decisions no one warns you about. He handled the contracts, the vendors, the emails. We compromised. We communicated. Normal couple stuff. Choosing my maid of honor wasn't even a discussion. She'd been my best friend since we were teenagers. The girl who held my hair back in college bathrooms, who slept on hospital chairs when my mom was sick, who once drove 3 hours in the middle of the night because I said, "I'm not okay," and nothing else. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't aesthetic, she was solid. When I asked her, she cried, ugly cried, hugged me so hard I lost my breath. "I've got you," she said, "always." He knew that. He knew our history. He'd thanked her more than once for taking care of me before he ever showed up. Which is why, looking back, the shift feels so jarring. Sometime during wedding planning, his ex name started popping up again. Casual mentions. She liked that restaurant. She's good with event stuff. Then messages. Calls he didn't hide, but didn't volunteer details about either. She knows some of our friends, he said when I asked. It's not a big deal. I wanted to believe that. I told myself not to be the insecure fiancé, not to read into things, not to question a man who had, until then, shown up consistently. So when he asked for my input on suits, playlists, timelines, when everything seemed collaborative, I thought we were solid. What I didn't see coming was the moment he'd decide that the woman who'd always stood beside me was suddenly expendable. That he'd frame it as a reasonable request. That he'd already made plans before ever asking me. And that, somewhere along the way, he'd confused partnership with control. The first time something felt off, it wasn't dramatic. It was small, quiet, the kind of moment you almost miss if you're not paying attention. We were finalizing the seating chart one evening, laptops open, half watching a show neither of us cared about. I mentioned casually that my maid of honor had already booked her dress fitting and was excited about helping with the bachelorette weekend. He didn't respond right away. Not verbally, but his jaw tightened. Just a fraction. His eyes flicked back to his screen a little too quickly. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, too fast. I let it go. A few days later, I noticed he'd changed the shared wedding spreadsheet. The bridal party tab looked different. My maid of honor's name was still there, but it had been moved, shifted down, like a placeholder instead of a certainty. "Hey," I said, leaning over his shoulder. "Why'd you move her name?" He shrugged. "Just playing with layout, seeing how things look." Seeing how things look. That phrase started coming up a lot. How the photos would look, how the lineup would look, how everything would come across. It wasn't about people anymore, it was about presentation. Then came the comments. Nothing overt, nothing you could call out without sounding dramatic. "She's great, but she's not exactly comfortable in formal settings. She doesn't really blend with my side of the family. She's quiet. Weddings are high energy." "She's been there for me longer than anyone," I replied once, my voice steady but my chest tight. "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not saying she shouldn't be involved, just maybe not front and center." Front and center. The words lodged somewhere deep. Around the same time, his ex's presence became more normalized. Her name popped up in conversations like she'd always belonged there. She offered to help with the timeline. She's really good with event coordination. She knows our friend group. That was new. One night, his phone lit up on the coffee table while he was in the shower. A message preview flashed on the screen. "Blake's going to love that song choice." I stared at it longer than I should have. When he came back, I didn't accuse. I didn't demand. I just asked, "Are you still talking to her?" He paused, just a beat. "Yeah," he said, "but it's nothing." Nothing, apparently, included inside jokes, opinions, familiarity. "She's part of my past," he added. "I can't erase that." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "I just need to understand where the line is." He smiled like I was being sweet, naive. "There's nothing to worry about." But my body didn't agree. The air between us started to feel heavier. Conversations ended faster. He grew defensive over things that had never been issues before. When I brought up boundaries, he called me sensitive. When I asked for reassurance, he said I was overthinking. And when I reminded him that this was our wedding, not a photo shoot, he sighed like I was exhausting. I started replaying moments in my head. The moved names, the casual comments, the way he talked about aesthetic more than meaning. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet, because part of me was still clinging to the version of him who knelt on our apartment floor, ring steady in his hand, promising a future. I didn't know then that the real conflict wasn't about my maid of honor. It was about who he thought he could replace, and how easily he thought I'd let him. The night it finally broke open didn't look like a fight. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no raised voices that warned you something irreversible was about to happen. It was just dinner. Takeout containers between us. The kind we ordered when we were too tired to cook, but still wanted to sit together at the table like we were doing things right. The apartment smelled faintly like soy sauce and reheated rice. His phone sat face down beside his plate. He cleared his throat halfway through the meal. "So," he said casually, too casually, "I've been thinking more about the wedding party." I didn't look up right away. My shoulders tightened before my brain caught up. "Okay," I said. "I think we need to make a change." I finally met his eyes. What kind of change? He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head like he was about to pitch an idea at work. I don't think your best friend should be maid of honor. The words landed, heavy and precise. I set my chopsticks down slowly. Why? He exhaled, like he'd expected resistance, like he'd rehearsed this. She's just not the right fit, he said. She's awkward at formal events. She doesn't really shine in group settings. She's not there to shine, I said. She's there because she's my best friend. I know that, he replied quickly. But this is our wedding. It's about how everything comes together. There it was again. How it looks. My pulse started to thud in my ears. What is this really about? He hesitated, just long enough to confirm my worst instinct. I want my ex involved instead. Silence stretched between us. Involved how? I asked, though something inside me already knew. I think she'd be perfect as part of the wedding party, he said. Maybe even standing beside you. Standing beside me. You want your ex-girlfriend to replace my maid of honor, I said slowly. I wouldn't say replace, he countered. Just adjust. Adjust. I stared at him, searching his face for humor, for hesitation, for any sign he understood how absurd this sounded. There was none. She already agreed, he added. The room tilted. You already asked her? My voice was quiet, controlled. I knew you'd be weird about it, he said, so I wanted to lock it in first. Lock it in. I felt something inside me go very still. You made plans about our wedding, I said, with your ex, before talking to me. He shrugged. It's not that deep. Not that deep. I laughed once, a short, breathless sound that surprised both of us. You want me to remove the woman who's been in my life for 17 years, I said, because she doesn't fit your aesthetic, and replace her with the woman you dated for 4 years. He frowned. You're making it sound dramatic. I'm stating facts. She knows all our friends, he pressed. She photographs well. She's comfortable in front of people. And my best friend isn't, I said flatly. He hesitated, then said it. Well, no. There it was. The unspoken judgment finally given a voice. I pushed my chair back and stood, hands trembling just enough that I had to curl them into fists. So this is the deal? I asked. You want your ex in my wedding party. And my he's, it means pushing out the person who's always been there for me. He nodded. Yes. I took a breath, let it out slowly. Interesting choice, I said. He smiled, actually smiled. So you'll talk to her, he asked. Explain it gently. I looked at him, really looked at him, and understood something with terrifying clarity. He thought I would bend. That night, after he went to bed, I sat on the couch in the dark, phone in my hand, heart steady, mind sharp. And by the next morning, I made sure no one would ever try to replace my people again. Because once someone shows you exactly who they value, you believe them. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was spiraling, but because my mind had gone eerily quiet. I lay there staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me, breathing slow and even, like he hadn't just tried to rearrange my life without my consent. My heartbeat stayed steady. No shaking, no tears, just a growing sense of distance, like I'd stepped back and was finally seeing him in proper focus. At some point near dawn, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. The grief came later. What I felt then was clarity. I got up before he did, made coffee, sat at the table with my laptop open, staring at the wedding folder like it belonged to someone else. Contracts, deposits, dates circled in red, all of it suddenly felt optional. When he woke up, he kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. Morning, he said. I looked at him and wondered how many conversations he'd had in his head where I said yes. I'm going out, I said. I need space to think. He nodded, relieved, confident. Take your time. That confidence hardened something in me. I drove to my best friend's apartment. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just pulled me into a hug that made my throat tighten despite myself. We sat on her couch, knees tucked up, mugs cooling between our hands. He wants to replace you, I said finally, with his ex. She didn't gasp, didn't curse, didn't say I knew it. She just went very still. I figured, she said quietly. That hurt more than I expected. You knew? She nodded. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but he's been weird with me for months. Little comments, little looks, like I was in the way. I closed my eyes. He already asked her, I added, before talking to me. Her jaw tightened. So you're not his partner. You're his obstacle. The words settled heavy and undeniable. We didn't talk about what I should do. She didn't push. She didn't demand loyalty. She just said, whatever you decide, I'm here. That was the difference. By the time I got back home, the decision had crystallized. He was in the kitchen, phone in hand, smiling at something on the screen. Hey, he said. She's excited. Thinks this will be great. She? I asked, though I already knew. My ex, he said casually. She's really grateful you're being open-minded. Something in my chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with disbelief. You told her I agreed? I asked. Well, you didn't say no. I nodded once. That night I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't threaten. I listened, to the way he framed it as reasonable, to how often he said aesthetic, to how rarely he said you. He talked about optics, about energy, about how weddings were about impressions. Not once did he talk about respect. When he finally stopped, he waited, expectant. I met his eyes. I need you to understand something, I said calmly. I don't compete with exes. I don't erase my people for appearances. And I don't marry men who think decisions about my life can be made without me. He frowned. You're overreacting. No, I said, I'm reacting appropriately. He sighed, like I was the problem. So what, you're going to blow up everything over this? I didn't answer, because by then I already had. The next morning, I made the calls. And with every cancellation, every confirmation email, every non-refundable deposit I let go of, I felt lighter. Not weaker, stronger. Because choosing myself didn't feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. By the time the last cancellation email went out, it was barely noon. The venue was polite but unmoved. The caterer sounded almost apologetic. The photographer paused before saying, I'm sorry, like he actually meant it. Each call ended the same way, with a confirmation number, a reminder about non-refundable deposits, and a soft good luck that landed heavier than it should have. $22,000. 3 years of careful saving, gone in a single morning. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spreadsheet, the total glowing back at me like a dare. And I didn't flinch. What surprised me wasn't the loss. It was the relief. I packed a small bag. Not dramatically, just enough for a few days. Jeans, a sweater, my laptop charger. I placed the engagement ring on the counter, exactly where he'd see it the moment he walked in. Then I turned my phone off and drove straight to my best friend's place. She opened the door, took one look at the bag, and nodded. Done? She asked. Done, I said. She didn't celebrate, didn't tell me I'd done the right thing. She handed me a drink and let me sit in silence until my shoulders finally dropped. When I turned my phone back on 6 hours later, it felt like releasing a pressure valve. 14 missed calls, dozens of texts, voicemails stacked so tightly they blurred together. The first was confusion. What happened? The venue says we're canceled. The second was anger. You can't just do this without talking to me. The third was panic. My mom is calling everyone. What did you do? Then came bargaining. Okay, fine. Your best friend can stay maid of honor. My ex doesn't have to be involved. Please call me. I listened to every single one, calmly, completely. And then, because something precise and unignorable lives inside me when I'm pushed too far, I opened my laptop. I made an invoice, a clean one, professional. The same template I use for consulting work. Line by line, I listed every lost deposit, venue, catering, photographer, florist, DJ. Total due $22,000. I addressed it to his ex. In the notes section, I typed, "Thank you for the inspiration to cancel. Your role in the wedding was clearly important." I emailed it to her and CC'd him. Then I sent a group message to all 150 guests. The wedding between myself and his name has been canceled. No drama. We realized we have fundamentally different values. Thank you for your understanding. No explanation, no apology, no justification. Then I turned my phone off again. The next morning, escalation arrived in person. My best friend answered the door before I could stop her. He stood there holding a box of my things from our apartment. Full makeup, the cologne I liked. That familiar expression, the one he used when he wanted forgiveness without accountability. She doesn't want to see you, my best friend said calmly. This is between me and my fiancé, he replied. Ex-fiancé, she corrected. I stepped forward. Say what you came to say, I told him. Baby, please, he started. This is insane. You're throwing away 3 years over one small request. Small? I asked. You were thinking about photos, he said. Memories. You called my best friend unpresentable, I said. He winced. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. He glanced past me, irritated. This isn't about her. My best friend smiled tightly. I'm literally standing right here. He ignored her. My mom wants to know who's paying her back for the suit, he said. The custom one, the tailor deposit. I looked at him, incredulous. That's between you and your mom, I said evenly. I never asked her to pay for anything. You canceled the wedding, he snapped. You wanted your ex to replace my maid of honor. She could have just been a bridesmaid, he shot back. Maybe maid of honor. It was a suggestion. My best friend let out a short laugh. You already asked her, she said, before talking to her. He spun on her. This is your fault. For what? She asked calmly. Existing? That's when the car pulled up. His mother stepped out like she was heading into battle. She didn't greet anyone, just looked at me and said, Do you have any idea how much we've invested? I invested $22,000, I replied. You chose the rest. She exploded, called me ungrateful, dramatic, told me I was lucky anyone wanted to marry me. I'd rather be alone, I said quietly, than marry someone who treats me like an accessory. They left in a fury. An hour later, his ex texted, This invoice is a joke, right? I'm not paying for your wedding drama, I replied with one line. Not my circus anymore. That's when the social media posts started. Vague accusations, performative outrage, stories about control and insecurity. So I posted the invoice. No caption, no context, just the image, and watched the narrative collapse. Because when the truth is documented, it doesn't need defending. The silence hit a few days later. Not the peaceful kind. The hollow kind that settles in after the adrenaline burns off. When there's nothing left to do but feel the weight of what you've lost, even when you know you made the right choice. I moved into a short-term place downtown. A studio with white walls, borrowed furniture, and windows that faced another building so close I could see people brushing their teeth at night. It wasn't home. It was a pause. The first night there, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, phone in my lap, scrolling through photos I hadn't had the courage to delete yet. Us at a wedding last summer. Him laughing, arm around my waist. Me leaning into him, completely sure. I didn't cry right away. I just stared, chest tight, throat dry, feeling something fracture quietly inside me. This was the cost. Not the money, not the deposits. The cost was mourning a future that would never exist. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for a phone that wasn't buzzing anymore, for a body that wasn't beside me. Muscle memory is cruel like that. It doesn't care about logic. My best friend checked in constantly. Texts, quick calls, dropping off groceries without making it a big deal. I'm team you on this, she said one night, sitting beside me on the couch, legs tucked under her. No hesitation. I nodded, but my chest still ached. Because strength doesn't cancel grief. It just carries it. Meanwhile, the noise outside my little bubble grew louder. He started posting. Long captions about betrayal, about being blindsided, about how some women don't know how to compromise. Friends from his side liked and commented, validating him without ever asking questions. His mother left voicemails I didn't answer, each one sharper than the last. You humiliated our family. You threw away something good. You'll regret this when you realize what you lost. I blocked her after the fifth one. That night, alone in my too quiet apartment, I finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a slow, shaking exhale that turned into tears I couldn't stop. I cried for the version of me who trusted easily, for the life I thought I was building, for the time I couldn't get back. I cried because even when you walk away from the right thing, it still hurts. The lowest point came a week later. I got a notification from my bank about unusual activity on my credit card. A pending charge. Then another, and another. Furniture. Thousands of dollars. Shipping address. The apartment we used to share. My hands went cold. I called the bank, canceled the card, disputed the charges. The woman on the phone was kind in that tired way people get when they've heard this story before. Let me guess, she said gently. Recent breakup? Yes, I whispered. After that, I went straight to the police station. Sitting under fluorescent lights, explaining my canceled wedding to a stranger in uniform, felt surreal. The officer nodded, jotting notes. We see this a lot, he said. You did the right thing coming in early. I walked out feeling exposed, raw, like every boundary I'd set was being tested. On my way home, my phone rang again. This time it was a friend who worked at a dealership. Hey, he said cautiously. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Your ex is here, trying to trade in your car. My car. The one in my name, the one I paid for. Something inside me went very still. The sadness drained out, replaced by something colder, sharper. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was entitlement. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. Eyes tired, jaw tight, posture straighter than it had been in weeks. The man I thought I loved wasn't just careless with my feelings. He was willing to take from me when he didn't get his way. And in that moment, sitting alone in a borrowed apartment with nothing but a folding chair and a box of dishes, I realized the darkest part of this story wasn't losing him. It was understanding who he'd been all along, and knowing I'd almost married it. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the dealership. The sky was low and gray, the kind that presses down on your shoulders, but my hands were steady on the steering wheel. Whatever sadness had lived in me days earlier had burned itself out. What was left was resolve. When I walked into the showroom, I saw them immediately. Him, tense, jaw set, trying to look calm. Her, hovering too close, one hand on his arm like she belonged there. They were arguing with a sales manager. "It's community property," she was saying sharply. "We live together. He owes me." "We were never married," I said, my voice cutting clean through the noise. Both of them turned. His face flickered, shock, then irritation. "Oh, now you show up." "Yes," I said, "to stop you from stealing my car." She scoffed. "I'm not stealing anything. I need transportation. He ruined my life." I looked at the sales manager. "The title is in my name, only my name." The manager nodded. "That's correct." Her eyes darted to him. He stepped forward, trying to puff himself up. "Look," he said, lowering his voice like this was a negotiation. "She just needs help getting back on her feet, after everything you did." "What I did," I repeated slowly, "was cancel a wedding after you tried to replace my maid of honor with your ex." The manager raised his eyebrows, clearly entertained. "And," I continued, "I've already filed a police report for credit card fraud." Her face went pale. "Fraud?" she snapped. "I used the card for necessities." $8,000 in furniture, I said. "For an apartment you no longer live in." The sales manager coughed, poorly hiding a laugh. He tried again. "Can you just let her use the car for a few weeks?" I stared at him. "You wanted your ex in my wedding," I said evenly. "Now you want me to lend her my car." Silence. The manager cleared his throat. "I'm going to ask you both to leave." He didn't cry. His jaw tightened instead, muscles jumping along his cheek as his face flushed with anger and humiliation. His hands curled into fists at his sides like he was holding himself back from saying something that would make things worse. "You've ruined everything," he said, voice sharp, brittle. "My wedding. My stability." "You did that yourself," I replied evenly, "when you decided control mattered more than respect." The showroom doors opened again. A man walked in, tall, sharply dressed, his expression controlled, but unmistakably furious. I recognized him immediately from the photos I'd seen online. He wasn't here for my fiancé. He was here for her. "There you are," he said, eyes locked on his partner. My fiancé stiffened beside her, jaw tightening. "Explain," the man continued, voice low, "why I'm hearing about this from a dealership." She opened her mouth, closed it. He didn't look at my fiancé again. He turned to me instead. "Are you the one who canceled the wedding?" "I am." He nodded once. "Good." Then he faced her. "We're leaving," he said. Not loud, not dramatic. She hesitated. He waited. She moved. My fiancé stood there, suddenly irrelevant. After they walked out, the showroom felt unnaturally quiet. Outside, the man stopped beside me. "I didn't know about you," he said. "She told me this was about helping a friend." I believed him. He nodded once, followed her to the car, and drove away. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the sharp air, feeling something click into place. For weeks, I'd been reacting, absorbing, defending. This was the first moment I felt in control again. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was his father. His voice was tired, stripped of anger. "I need to apologize," he said. "This isn't how I raised him." He paused. "I'll handle the credit card situation, and you dodged something worse than a bad marriage." I hung up and sat in my quiet apartment, the city humming outside the window. For the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't replaying the past. I was looking forward, because the truth had finally surfaced. And with it, my power came back. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, administrative, social, legal, each one stripping away another illusion he'd been hiding behind. 2 days after the dealership incident, my credit card company called again. The disputed charges were officially flagged as fraud. Because the purchases happened after our separation and were shipped to an address he no longer had permission to use, the intent was clear. The case moved forward. That same afternoon, a friend who worked in finance texted me a screenshot. "Hey, your ex is asking around about emergency loans, saying he got cut off." Cut off. I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, phone resting in my palm, and laughed once, short and humorless. I hadn't cut him off. I had stopped funding his assumptions. The narrative he tried to build online unraveled even faster. He posted a long message about being blindsided and emotionally abandoned. Comments poured in, at first sympathetic, then confused. People started asking questions. Why was his ex involved in the wedding? Why was there an invoice floating around? Why had the wedding been canceled so suddenly? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Screenshots did the work for me. The invoice circulated, quietly at first, then everywhere. Friends tagged friends. Group chats lit up. The tone shifted from support to side-eye. By the end of the week, he deleted the post. His mother tried next. She called from a blocked number. I recognized her voice immediately. "You didn't have to destroy him like this," she said. "He's humiliated." "He humiliated himself," I replied. "Please don't call me again." She started to argue. I hung up. That night, his father called. It was the first time he'd ever reached out directly. "I need to be clear," he said, voice low and controlled. What he did was unacceptable. I didn't interrupt. "I'm covering the fraudulent charges if the bank needs restitution," he continued, and I've told him he's on his own financially from here on out. There was a pause. "You didn't deserve any of this." I closed my eyes. "Thank you," I said. The legal notice arrived a week later. He was suing me. Claim: emotional distress and financial abandonment. Damages sought: $50,000. I read the filing once, then again. It accused me of maliciously canceling the wedding to humiliate him, of isolating him, of orchestrating a harassment campaign, of causing him to lose professional opportunities. It even claimed I had financially trapped him and then cut him off without warning. I handed the papers to my lawyer without comment. He skimmed the first page, then laughed. "This is desperation," he said. "He has no case." We countersued. Credit card fraud, attempted theft of property, false statements. 2 weeks later, the civil suit was dismissed with prejudice. The fraud case continued. The consequences landed where they belonged. He lost his apartment, moved in with a friend, then another, then his brother. His ex stopped answering his calls after realizing how public everything had become. Even she had limits. I heard through mutuals that he'd tried to spin the story again, this time as a man who'd been misunderstood. But without access to my money, my resources, or my silence, the story didn't stick. Meanwhile, my life got quieter. Better. I finished unpacking my studio, bought secondhand furniture with cash, hung art I actually liked, started cooking for myself again. Slow meals, intentional ones. My best friend came over every Friday night. We ordered takeout, talked about everything except him. "I'm proud of you," she said one night, raising her glass. "You chose yourself." That mattered more than she knew. The final blow came unexpectedly. A message from his father. "We're moving, his mother and I. We won't be supporting him anymore. He needs to figure out adulthood on his own." I stared at the text for a long time. This wasn't victory. It was closure. Not the kind that feels triumphant, but the kind that settles in your chest like a quiet certainty. He didn't lose me because I was cruel. He lost me because he crossed a line he thought didn't exist. And once consequences showed up, they didn't leave. I wasn't watching his life fall apart anymore. I was watching mine come back together. The wedding date came and went quietly. No aisle, no music, no vows spoken in front of people who would have watched me swallow my instincts to keep the peace. Instead, I spent that day in my small studio apartment, sunlight cutting across the floor in clean lines, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. There was takeout on the counter. Fresh flowers I'd bought for myself. Nothing dramatic. Just calm. In the weeks that followed, the legal pieces wrapped themselves up exactly the way they should have. The fraud charges stuck. Restitution was ordered. The civil case he tried to file was dismissed before it ever reached a courtroom. Consequences didn't scream. They arrived quietly, stamped and signed. I didn't celebrate when I heard. I just nodded and went back to what I was doing. Healing doesn't need an audience. My life began to fill in with things that belonged to me again. Friday nights with my best friend on my couch, eating noodles straight from the container. Slow mornings where no one questioned my choices. A routine built on my own rhythm instead of someone else's expectations. One evening, my therapist said something that stayed with me. "You didn't cancel a wedding," she said. "You canceled a future where you were always going to come second." She was right. Love doesn't ask you to erase the people who kept you alive before it arrived. It doesn't call loyalty aesthetic, and it doesn't frame control as compromise. If someone asks you to trade your history for their comfort, that isn't growth. It's containment. I used to think strength meant staying, enduring, proving you could make it work. Now I know better. Strength is leaving before the damage becomes permanent. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder for the relationship. It's to recognize when the relationship is already fighting you. I didn't lose a fiancé. I gained my future back. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. When someone shows you who they value, believe them. Then choose yourself. Because peace, real peace, is worth more than any wedding ever could be. If this story resonated with you, thank you for being here. If you've lived something similar, you're not alone. Feel free to comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories about boundaries, self-respect, and choosing yourself.